Hey there, it's Juno here. I was recently thinking about how we gauge association in the real world and we make observations and try to draw conclusions about what is, well, obviously epistemologically, what is real, but basically what is tangible, what is physical, and what concepts are we able to assign to the nomenclature that exists already. And sometimes I think my overriding feeling is that we have gaps in our knowledge. We have an area that has a certain dimension to it that we understand should be filled by some phenomenon. And then we go around in life looking for what this phenomenon could be that should fill this space. And it's kind of like kids playing with the blocks and shapes that go through the holes and then drop into the box. Um, so we have a vague idea of what the gap is, and then we just look to see what should go into that. Though sometimes when you're in early development, you only understand that something should go through it, and so you're able to sort of manipulate the shapes into turning in certain ways that they're able to go through the holes they shouldn't be able to go through. But in your mind, you then draw the association to say, well, that's the hole for this thing. And I kind of think that's representative of a lot of the way we do actually think, even in our adult lives, where we're trying to find something that should approximate the shape and qualities of this gap, and then we look to fill it with our understanding. But sometimes what can happen is we find something that maybe will enter that space, but it doesn't actually fill all of the dimensions required for it to be the associated item that we're trying to describe. Unfortunately, though, once we've found something that will go through it, we kind of just assume, well, that's the correct thing, and then we go about our lives thinking that's one thing done. We know what this is now. We'll continue on. That becomes problematic because then you begin to base other knowledge and other experience on this faulty association, on this faulty designation that this is the thing that you believe fit in there. So we're always kind of looking like, is there something we didn't know? So was there something about the space and shape of this concept that we weren't actually sure about, and that later on we can go on to discover what truly should fit this gap in our knowledge. So this brings me to the map that I'm looking at today. So this is just a map of the London Underground. It has a fair amount of notoriety. People are aware of it. But what they might not be aware of is this map is a cartographical representation. It doesn't actually map directly onto the physical locations. It's an approximation so that it's appealing and logical, and it has an aesthetic quality, but it also serves the function that you can see in reference to one station where another station is and how they interlink. Though this clearly falls down in one way, because you might know that the distance between, let's say, Bank Station and Monument Station, even though they're shown as interlinked in almost one continuous station on the map, may actually be further than, just for instance, to say between Bank Station and St Paul's. That actually might be a closer association, or maybe even Liverpool Street might be closer. I don't know in reality if that's true. However, I know that the map does not represent that accurately, so we can't take that as accurate. But to the casual observer, that would not be apparent. So this is interesting to me because on another screen, on another layer here, I actually have a map of the Moscow Metro. And we have this visual reference. This visual reference is instrumental in our understanding. But the problem is, if I was to describe the visual references to you and not tell you which one was which, I think there would be a large layer of ambiguity here that you would struggle to understand. Alright, is he talking about Moscow? Is he talking about London? Now, these are two different cities. They are constructed differently. You should not be able to navigate one off the other, and in reality, if you tried to, physically on the street, you wouldn't be able to do it. However, when put into the context of this representation of these maps, it almost appears like you can. So how is it that one thing can appear like another thing? And let me just go ahead and demonstrate that, actually. It's no good me just saying that's the case. Let me demonstrate. Alright. I'm sorry, these are pre-prepared. I did actually look into this first and take some references before I started this, so it's not spur of the moment that I'm just pulling these out of the air, but nevertheless, they prove the point. So let's go back to London. Let's say I'm at Bank Station, alright? Alright, so what does Bank Station look like? Well, it's on the red line. It's interconnected with what seems to be two other stations. So it's a triptych here. It's like three stations together. Alright, well, let's go back to Moscow. Well, here we go. We've got a station on the red line. It's interlinked with what looks like two other stations, so it's like a triptych of stations all interlinked. Okay, well, that's just you could say that's one data point, right? You can't call that a strong association. You only have a low correlation at this time. Okay, well, let's continue on then. Let's say we were able to go along the red line a little bit more, up and to the right. Well, look here, you have two interlinked stations. This is another data point, something notable that you could actually pull out the air and say, okay, well, this isn't the common. This looks a little more anomalous. So maybe this is a good way of identifying one from the other. Well, you'd think that, but then you go over to Moscow, and sure enough, along the red line, up and to the right, pair of interlinked stations. Okay, well, yeah, all right, a couple. All right, fine. You've got a couple of similarities. What if we go back and we go, all right, well, let's kind of describe this a bit further. Let's go down to the left. Well, it looks like we've got a cluster of stations interlinking a bunch of lines. All right, down into the left, cluster of stations interlinking a group of lines. Sure enough, yeah, look here, Moscow. Down to the left, cluster of stations interlinking a bunch of lines. All right, so clearly what's happening here is I'm able to only give you certain information, right? The input of information is being controlled. It's only allowing for certain things to be said. But in the real world, this is how information is passed on, right? You don't always have a visual reference to look at and to say, well, I can see that, there's a number of differences. For one, it's all in Russian, and that there are clearly more lines and more activity going on. Yeah, but in real life, when you're describing concepts, even to yourself, when you're internalizing a concept, you do tend to use language to some degree to formulate your ideas, your notions about the phenomena and the properties inside that concept that construe it. And you could continue to do this. I could say, well, the red line it dissipates up and to the right. Fine. All right. Well, sure enough. Here, look again. London, up and to the right. The red line dissipates. Yeah, you could. It wouldn't be difficult for you to just keep on going and find more associations. And in the context of this image, it does kind of look like they're similar. But we know London and Moscow are two different places. We are aware that they are separate. So why is it that they can be represented to seem the same in some ways? And could that be done convincingly? Could I, with only limited information, come to the conclusion that London and Moscow is in fact the same place? Well, if you look at it from this map, if you didn't know how to read the map and you were trying to describe it to somebody, you could certainly make it appear that way. You could make it appear like London and Moscow were the same place. And you could even try and direct them from that knowledge. So this clearly represents what I think to be a kind of I'd hate to say fallacy because I don't really know what the word means. I think it means like an incorrect logical underpinning. But, to some degree you could say, well, there is a logic to it, there is a logic to this system, but all we've had to do really is we've incorporated a perspective that makes associations in similar ways, and then we've merely placed one concept on top of another concept and drawn out the similarities and then trying to portray them as essentially being the same thing. The key to this obviously is more information. The more information you have, the more you can actually make true associations, and more importantly, disassociations, so you can see where it's different. This is problematic because human beings, we like to find patterns. We are very good at pattern recognition. So sometimes not seeing the pattern is the more difficult thing to do. I'm not going to expand on this much further. I'm just going to say that, yeah, sure, look, okay, so again, London, look, everything seems to be, from what we can see here, these properties that are already described, well, they're sort of in the first zone, but we can see it's surrounded by a second zone that does seem to have some of the other features. Yeah, sure enough, it's represented exactly the same on the Moscow map. On the metro map, yeah, there's like a zone 1, this area here in the center, and as you dissipate outwards, it goes into a zone 2. these are expected features. You should be able to see these on most things. However, if you weren't aware of that contextually, you could be described to say that they were the same thing. I agree that if you're going to say that there's issues with the way that I've analysed this, I'm not doubting that. What I am saying is that in terms of persuading yourself or being persuaded by somebody else or something else, there is a degree of frame shifting that can be done to make two things that are dissimilar appear similar. And I think that's very interesting. And I think that's something that you need to be aware of and be conscious of, because we don't always have the mental ability to draw a map of the properties that are instilled within a concept or within an item or a phenomenon that we're trying to identify. So again, if you were just being described it, word of mouth, trying to find one way to another, someone could read the Moscow Metro and make it sound like the London Underground, and clearly that's not right. Clearly that would be falling foul of something. And that's just something I wanted to illuminate, because I thought it was quite interesting. And I wonder if there is a way of constructing a mental map like this so that we can see the obvious differences. And I wonder how often in our experience we end up coming to the conclusion that one thing is the other thing when it actually isn't, because we fall foul of exactly this kind of rationalization where we take points of interest or coordinates to a degree and then make associations between them and start seeing similarities. Alright, well, thanks for staying with me on that. If I have any more thoughts, I'll keep you praised. Thanks very much.